Hey, Gaming Geek coming at you with a tutorial video on how to play Kill Team. This is part of my series where I am on a quest to look for the perfect skirmish game with a futuristic theme. And so I'll be looking at Kill Team, but first I have to explain to everybody how to play the game. One of the things that surprised me about Kill Team is that there aren't that good of tutorials on YouTube. And that's a wonder because Warhammer TV has an overview of the rule set, but they actually don't get down into showing dice rolls, comparing that to the stat cards. And the other tutorials that I found online, although they show examples or are bat reps for the gameplay, they don't show you the data cards and how they're coming up with the required dice rolls. And so in this tutorial, I really want to show you the data cards, how the dice rolls fit in, and all of the modifiers that are going into the rolls. Because one of the things that's true about this game is you are rolling a lot. For every shot, for every hand-to-hand combat, there are multiple steps that you're going through in order to resolve combat. And so hopefully this tutorial will touch on that a little bit more in detail. This is a two-part series where I'll first explain the rules, and then in the second video I'll actually play through a game, again, taking the time to look at each of the roles and all of the modifiers that go into them. And so after this video, make sure you look at that and see how the rules are going to be explained more in depth in that second video. I'm sure that I'm going to get some of the rules wrong as well as omit some of the rules. Please go ahead and write those down in the comments below, and I'll keep a running tally of rules that I either get wrong or ones that I don't explain very well into the description. So expand the descriptions below the video, and that should give you more details. So here it is set up and ready for the demonstration. We are basically just going to go through the rule book step by step so that you know what happens in each phase. And the first thing that they point out are the data sheets, and so let's go ahead and grab this pre-printed one that came with the Adeptus Astartes starter set. And what you see across here that's going to be helpful is, first of all, there is the movement, which is 6 inches, the weapon skill, which is a 3+, the ballistic skill, which is shooting, which is 3+, strength is 4, toughness is 4, wounds is 2, which is how many hit points that they have. Attack is 3, and that is in close combat only, melee combat. Leadership value is 8, and the save is a 3+. Down here you see stats for their weapons. This is their range, the type that it is, the number of dice that you're going to roll with each attack, the strength of the weapon, armor piercing, the damage that it does if you succeed, and then any special abilities. And down here it shows you what those special abilities are, and you will go ahead and look at their stat sheets in the manual to explain what it is. So for example here, the ability "They shall know no fear" is found right here as an explanation that you can re-roll failed nerve tests for this model. And so these data sheets are really helpful. This has a specialist as a leader, which provides the resourceful skill, which enables you to have an extra command point at the beginning of each battle round. And then this is the experience, to keep track of experience, because this does have a campaign mode, the number of flesh wounds that they have, and then these are the stats for in between battles. So that's basically your stat card, and if you don't have those pre-made ones, you can print them out. This is one that I printed out for my Tyranid warrior. So every battle round is composed of 6 phases, and the first one is the initiative phase, second is movement, third is psychic, fourth is shooting, the fight phase, which is the melee, and then finally the morale phase. So let's go ahead and start off with the initiative phase. Very easy. Both sides, purple are the Tyranids, yellow are the Adeptus, and you pretty much roll, and whoever has the higher will have initiative for that battle round. So the Tyranids are going to beat out the Adeptus Astartes. with 6-4, and so they are going to have initiative this battle round. So very simple. If there are ties, you just re-roll. Next is the movement phase. So with movement, it's fairly simple. You look at their movement value. Like I said, the Adeptus Astartes, or the Space Marines, they have a movement of 6. And so basically, they can move 6 inches. So this guy, during the movement phase, is able to move right up to the other. If you do move, you are allowed to shoot later on in the shoot phase with no penalties. A couple of models do have the fly ability. The fly ability just basically allows you to ignore obstacles or even vertical movement. And so let's say that he has a jump pack and he's able to fly. The distance that is found between here, he can ignore vertical and basically choose to go about, if he had a movement of 9 inches, he could make his way to the top here with fly. Otherwise, when you're going vertically, you have to take into account how far it is to get to the wall, which here would be 8 inches, and then you measure going up, which would be another 6 inches. So in total, you would have to have 14 inches of movement in order to get him up there. Now, you cannot go halfway up a wall because you run out of movement. If you get here and you don't have enough, you have to stay there on the bottom, and then next turn, try to make your way up to the top. Also another roll, and this is actually an advanced roll, as long as the obstacle is less than 1.5 inches high and 1.5 inches wide, models just jump over them. So you don't have to account for the vertical distance of going over models like that. Also, as long as buildings, there's a 2-inch gap in between, models are allowed to jump across gaps at no penalty. One of the restrictions with movement is that you cannot get within 1 inch of an enemy model and sort of move past them. And so make sure that as you're plotting your movement, that you stay at least 1 inch away from each of the enemy models. Another aspect of movement is something called falling back. If you are within 1 inch of a model and you're starting off, you can choose to fall back. And the token for falling back is actually this. And you can move up to your movement directly away from the model, further away from the model. And so if this Space Marine chooses to fall back, he can go 6 inches of where he is now, which would allow him basically to move back here. Now, the deal with falling back is he will not be able to shoot or do other activations during the second round, during either the shooting phase or the fight phase. Also, another option for movement is something called advance, which is represented by this token. If you choose to advance, what you're doing is you go ahead and move, for example, in this case, you're 6 inches, but you're also rolling your die. And you add that number to their base movement. And so in this case, the Space Marine could go another 5 inches. Now, he is not within 1 inch of the base of this character, and so he can skirt around as long as he stays away another 5 inches. And then once he advances, he just stays. You put that there. And there are penalties. When you advance, you're not allowed to shoot. You lose your shoot in the shooting phase, except there are weapons. For example, he has an assault bolt carbine that actually enables him to shoot during the round after he advances because of the assault ability. The assault ability, though, if you do advance, gives you a -1 to hit penalty. The other option is not to move at all, and you can ready. And so what that does is any readied models will be the first to shoot during the shoot phase. And so you don't get any bonuses to hit, but it just enables you to be first. Now, the most complicated thing about movement is actually the charge. Let's say the Space Marine is here. And the base movement for the Gene Stealer is 8 inches. But in charging, when you declare a charge, which is represented by this, you first declare which model you're going to charge to, and you can't switch or change your mind, right, based on a possible failed charge roll. And so here I'm going to decide to try to charge this Space Marine, but I declare it, and what happens is that the Space Marine has an opportunity to react. And there's two basic options that he has in reaction. The first is to overwatch. Overwatch is basically he gets his shots off of a range weapon, and here I'm going to choose the bolt carbine because I get to roll 2 dice for that. And I get basically a free attack. And so I'm going to roll 2 dice. You have to roll a 6 in order to hit, regardless of what your ballistic skill is. And so here we have a success. He does hit. If I had rolled anything else, even a 5, he would have missed. And so I'll explain later on how to resolve die rolls. But that's basically Overwatch as an option. The second option or reaction that he can have after being declared the target of a charge is to retreat. He can only retreat if he has not already made a move this round. And so as long as he doesn't have a token next to him, he can even have a ready token, and he would be able to retreat at this point, although he would lose the ready marker. But as long as he hasn't moved, which would be a basic move token next to him or an advanced token, as long as he hasn't done that already, he can react and choose to retreat. And retreat is basically moving up to 3 inches. 3 inches, and basically puts him right here. And what that does is that increases the gap between the charging model, because in charging you don't automatically get your base move. What you do in charging is you roll 2 die, and that's the number of inches that he can go. So he rolled an 8, and so this Gene Stealer can only go 8 inches. And let's see if that's going to get him close enough, which I don't think it will. Because at the end of your charge, you have to be able to be within an inch of your target. And so what happens here is, because he retreated, he successfully avoided the charge. Now the Gene Stealers are allowed to re-roll their any failed charge rolls, but let's say he actually did fail. I do still put a charge token saying that he attempted to charge. He doesn't get the advantage of close combat during the fight phase because it's actually a failed charge. When you charge, you're not allowed to shoot during the shoot phase, and so this failed charge prevents him from being able to shoot. The third phase we now enter into is the psychic phase, and this only applies if you have a psyker on your team. I don't have any psykers. In fact, I don't know of any Tyranids who has that ability. But for the sake of teaching, the Blood Angels captured a Chaos Psyker. And so they're forcing him to make a psychic attack to the Tyranids. And so let's say he's on the field, and in the psychic phase, basically you choose a psychic ability, and only one psyker. Even if I have 2 psykers on my team, I can only choose one to pull off one psychic ability. Every psyker has the Psybolt ability. It has a charge value of 5, and if it's successfully manifested, the closest enemy model within 18 inches, and that's visible, takes a mortal wound, and I'll explain what a mortal wound is later. And if the result of the psychic test is 11 plus, the target suffers D3 mortal wounds instead. And so, very simple, all you have to do is you roll the dice, 2 dice, and the psychic value for Psybolt was 5, so as long as, and I succeeded because there's 5 right here. As long as you succeed, then it's pulled off, and the closest visible enemy would take one mortal wound. Psychers are very powerful because they're not limited, the same limitations that people with guns have. And so Psychers are able to shoot into enemies that are engaged in melee with a friendly, as long as they're within the range limit, which here is 18 inches, there is no penalty or a 2-hit roll that you have to roll. One of the things to know about psychic abilities is if you roll double ones or double sixes, basically they explode. They have perils of the warp, where the Psyker suffers D3 mortal wounds. If they're taken out, they blow up, and each model within 3 inches immediately suffers D3 mortal wounds as well. And so that's pretty dangerous. If the opposing side has a Psyker on their team, they can attempt to oppose that roll. And so we remember that our friend over here rolled a 5, value of 5. And so if I had a Psyker on my my Tyranid team, all I have to do is roll, and if I beat that score, then I would be able to oppose it and it would fail. It's called a deny the witch test. And it has to be greater than the result of the psychic test that manifested in order to successfully resist. So in this case, it was a tie, and so the Tyranids would fail to stop the rogue Psyker from pulling it off. I would need to get at least one more. Once all of that is done, we move on into the shooting phase. Any model that has readied during the movement phase, they actually shoot first. And so here, the Tyranids, no one readied. Let's say everyone moved. He's actually the only one with a gun, so he's the only one who would be able to shoot during the shoot phase, but he didn't ready. Here on the Astartes side, we have this one Marine who has readied, so he's going to go first. So he picks his target. He's just going to shoot here because he has direct line of sight, so there's no penalty for being obscured, and he's going to roll his dice. You look at the ballistic skill, and again, that's a 3+, and you roll the number of dice for the weapon that you're using, and here it's an assault 2. So he's going to roll 2 dice, and he needs a 3+ to hit. So these 2 are successful, so there are 2 hits that are placed on to the Gene Stealer. There are a couple of modifiers to hit, and so you'll notice here if the target is at long range, and long range is basically anywhere between half of the maximum range up to the max range of the weapon. And so here we see that the bolt carbine is 24, so anything that is 12 to 24 inches away, he would get a -1 penalty, and so his 3+ would turn into a 4+. He would need a 4 in order to hit with that -1 penalty. Another modifier is that if the target model is obscured. Obscured is basically any intervening terrain or other models can obscure. And so, for example, he's wide open here, but let's say the Gene Stealer was actually here, and now he is obscured because any part of the model that is hidden behind an obstacle is considered obscured. And so he would get a -1 in this case. Also, each flesh wound that is on the attacking model, let's say here, and I'll explain flesh wounds later, but let's say this guy had a flesh wound, and so for 1 he would again have to roll at a -1. So right now, with obscuring and with a flesh wound, he has a -2. So his 3 means that turns into a 5. He needs to roll a 5+ in order to successfully hit with these modifiers. The final modifier is if the attacking model's kill team is broken. And broken is basically morale. The harsh thing about this game is that once you fail your morale test and your team is broken, you remain broken for the rest of the game. And that means that everyone is rolling at a -1 to hit. And so if the team was broken, he would have to hit on 6s because he would have a -3 penalty. One for his flesh wound, one for obscure, and one for being broken. Even if he had one more modifier and he would need a 7, which is impossible, 6s always are successful, no matter what. And so as long as you can roll a 6, you will be successful in hitting, even if the modifier sends you above 6 in order to hit. But let's go back to here where he had no modifiers and all he needed was a 3+ to hit. And let's say this is the roll that he got. So he had 2 successful hits. And so what needs to happen next is a wound roll. Is the strength equal to or greater than or lower than the target's toughness? And so the strength of this weapon, because he's shooting, we have to look at the weapon strength. So the strength here is 4, and then the toughness of the Gene Stealer is also 4. So they are equal, and so he needs to roll a 4+, so that he has a 50% chance of wounding. And so because he got 2 successes, he's going to roll both die, and both of them hit. Both of them succeed in wounding. Now the target gets a saving throw. And so because he got hit twice, he's going to roll 2 dice to save against these wounds. So we look over here at the card, and his save is a 5+. And so basically the Gene Stealer needs to roll 5s. Oh, and he succeeds. Now let's say he actually failed one. So 1 wound is actually going to go through, which is enough to kill a Gene Stealer, because a Gene Stealer here only has 1 wound or 1 hit point. But he is not automatically dead. There is another roll that needs to be made, and this is the injury roll. The controlling player makes an injury roll for that model, and I need to hope to roll between 1 and 3, which I do. If I roll a 4, 5, or 6, the model is removed and is killed. But if you roll anything 3 or below, the model takes a wound, a flesh wound, and that's what this is here. And those can stack, and a model can have up to 3. At the 4th wound, it is automatically killed. The 4th flesh wound. There are modifiers for the injury roll, and so here, if the injured model is obscured from the psyker or the shooter shooting at the model and is within 1 inch of a piece of terrain, then he gets a -1. And then, or each flesh wound on the injured model makes it easier to kill, and so you add those up. Close combat, it's the same thing. Flesh wound on the model gives it a +1. So what does that mean? Here in this circumstance, because part of the model is blocked by this intervening terrain between here and here, let's say it is, it might not be totally, but let's say it is. He gets a -1 to hit, but because he's not within 1 inch of this terrain, this -1 would not come into play. Only if he was within 1 inch and getting a little bit more cover would the -1 come into play. And so it's advantageous for the defender to have that -1, because let's say I rolled a 4, which normally would kill me, but the -1 would turn that into a 3, which gives him a flesh wound instead. So obviously, once a model has a couple of flesh wounds, let's say it has 2 flesh wounds here, and I'm rolling on the injury table, I would get a +2 for each flesh wound. And so here, even though I roll a 2, which normally would keep me from dying and giving me another flesh wound, because I have to add 2 to that, and this turns into a 4, he's killed and removed. So once all of the readied models are finished shooting and they resolve their combat, and you can flip this around to show that they have activated and are done for this battle round. Next starts the regular shooting phase. Because the turn is 1, the initiative, you take turns with each model, and at this point only this Tyranid warrior can shoot. And so he would take his turn and shoot, and then after he's done resolving his, then we go over here, and one of the Space Marines would take their turn. Now he can't shoot because he retreated this past round, and so he loses out on his shoot phase. He would be able to shoot next because even though he advanced, he has an assault type weapon, and he would be able to shoot. When you use an assault weapon after advancing, which is the only way to shoot, you get a -1 penalty to hit. So let's say he's going to try to shoot this Gene Stealer up here. He gets a -1 because he advanced and is now trying to shoot while he's moving. So now he needs to roll a 4, but this figure is also obscured and has some cover. So that's another -1 to hit. So that would be, he needs to hit on 5s. Bolt Carbine, he needs 5s to hit, and he missed both shots because of that. Now after the shooting phase is the fight phase, or this is the melee round. And the way the melee round works is everyone who charged successfully, they go first. And so let's say, I know that he failed in our example before, but let's say he got within 1 inch and was charging the Psyker. He would actually be the first to go because he's the only one who successfully charged. That works pretty much the same way as the shooting phase. The Gene Stealer will attack first with the Rending Claws. And so it's melee type. You use the strength of the user, which is 4, and it has -1 AP, and it does 1 point of damage. Because it's melee, we use the attack number here, which is 3. So we're going to roll 3 dice. Weapon skill is 3+. And so I need a 3+ in order to hit him. And so I managed to have 3 hits. Now I need to roll and see whether or not I wound him. And so I compare my strength, which is 4, to the strength of the Rogue Psyker, or the toughness of the Rogue Psyker, which is only 3. And because the strength is greater than the toughness by 1 point, I'm going to wound on a 3+ rather than a 4+. If the strength is twice or more than the toughness of the target, then you hit on a 2+, and it goes the other way around as well. Because I successfully hit 3 times, I'm going to roll all 3 dice, and I successfully wound 2 out of the 3. Now the Psyker has a save of 5+, so he's going to roll 2 dice. He needs 5+ to save. He saves against 1, so 1 wound is canceled, but 1 goes through. The damage that it does is 1 point of damage. Oh, I forgot to say that the armor piercing actually makes it a -1 on the save. And because it would be a -1, it would turn it into a 4. Basically, he actually takes both wounds. So the Psyker takes 2 points of damage. And we look over here, the Psyker actually has 4 wounds. So I just use dice to keep track of how many wounds they have. And so the Psyker has 2 wounds left to go. Only until he is brought down to 0 do you make the injury roll of 1 to 3 giving him a flesh wound, or 4 to 6 knocking him out of the game. But until then, you just keep track of hit points. The final phase is the morale phase. And here you check to see if your kill team is broken. The way that you determine that is if more than half of the models in your kill team currently has flesh wounds, are shaken, or are out of action, it may be broken. At that point, you roll 2d6, and if the total is greater than the highest leadership characteristic on the team, then it is broken. And this is what's painful. Once a kill team is broken, it stays broken for the rest of the game. Let's say, for example, the Adeptus Astartes, let's say half of them were either taken out or had flesh wounds. We would roll here 2 dice. They have pretty high leadership, which is 8. You would roll these dice, and they succeeded because it's 8 or lower. Also, let's say he had A flesh wound, any character with a flesh wound has to take an individual nerf test. Even if the team isn't broken or is broken, they have to take an individual nerf test, which is their leadership ability, not their leader's leadership ability. You roll one die, and as long as you get lower. Now you might be asking, it's not possible for him to get higher than an 8 on a D6. But again, there are modifiers. And so each other friendly model, other than shaken models, within 2 inches of the model gives the positive. It gives a -1. Remember, minus is good for nerf tests. You want to get as low of a number roll as possible. Or each other friendly model that is shaken or is out of action actually adds to the die, and that's how it's possible to roll higher than a 6 value on a D6. So there you have the basic rules for Kill Team, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there is a second part, a part 2, that will be coming out. Make sure you click on that because I'm going to go more in depth with some of the rules that I didn't cover over the basic review from this time. So make sure you click on that, like the video, and subscribe.